Well, the moment of truth is fast approaching in Alabama as the Senate race there entering its final stretch. You know, the clock is ticking down until voters go to the polls in just over 72 hours on Tuesday. Both candidates pulling out all the stops this weekend as we get word that President Trump will now record a last-minute robocall for Roy Moore. That his most direct involvement yet in the Alabama race. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shawn.
And I'm Arthel Neville. The president turning up the heat in an already hot race with Republican Roy Moore and Democrat Doug Jones neck and neck with the finish line in sight. But Moore's camp is hoping to get a boost from President Trump. The robocalls recorded today and the rally last night in Pensacola, Florida, which is close to the Alabama border. The president throwing his support behind Moore despite the sexual misconduct allegations against him.
We can't afford to have a liberal Democrat who is completely controlled by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. We can't do it. Can't do it. His name is Jones, and he's their total puppet, and everybody knows it. He will never, ever vote for us. We need somebody in that Senate seat who will vote for our Make America Great Again agenda.
And we have live team coverage from Alabama. Jonathan Seri is covering the Moore campaign, and Peter Ducey is standing by with the latest on Doug Jones. But first, let's go live to Jonathan Seri, live in Montgomery. Jonathan.
Hi, Arthel. White House officials confirming the president made that robocall earlier in the day. It's expected to go out on Monday, the day before the election. And while Moore did not appear with the president at that rally in Pensacola, he's certainly enjoying the favorable comments that the president made, urging Alabama voters to go out and vote for Roy Moore. The president explaining that it's about the balance of power in Washington, trying to preserve the GOP's thin majority in the U.S. Senate.
The future of this country cannot afford to lose a seat in the very, very close United States Senate. We can't afford it, folks. We can't.
Attorney Gloria Allred, who represents a woman who claims Moore sexually assaulted her when she was 16, says a forensic handwriting examiner has determined a note and signature in the woman's high school yearbook matched the handwriting of Roy Moore. However, the accuser, Beverly Nelson, has also revealed recently that she added some of her own handwritten notes below Moore's signature.
We did not ask the expert to examine the printing after the cursive writing and signature because Beverly indicates that she added that to remind herself of who Roy Moore was and where and when Mr. Moore signed her yearbook.
Okay, so that is Allred's explanation of why Nelson added her own handwriting to that yearbook entry. But the fact that they didn't reveal this until just recently, the Moore campaign is using this as evidence to discredit all of her testimony. They're calling on Nelson and Allred to turn over the yearbook to an independent third party so that it can undergo an unbiased handwriting analysis. Back to you.
Okay, Jonathan Seri, thank you for the update. Eric.
Meanwhile, Arthel, on the other side, Democratic candidate Doug Jones. Well, today he's mobilizing his supporters to try and turn out the vote, and he has some stinging words for his opponent. He made a strong statement for why the voters in Alabama should cast their ballots for him, and he pointed directly at those allegations against Moore that have so far dominated this contentious contest.
Roy Moore has never, ever served our state with honor. I damn sure believe that I have done my part to ensure that men who hurt little girls should go to jail and not the United States Senate.
And for more tonight, we're joined by Peter Ducey, who is in Verbena, Alabama. Peter, good evening.
Good evening, Eric. A big part of the Doug Jones strategy is to try to motivate African-American voters in Alabama to go out and vote for him on Tuesday. So to try to motivate that community to go out and vote on Tuesday for him, he phoned in some help from New Jersey Senator Cory Booker and Massachusetts Senator former Massachusetts Governor, Deval Patrick.
We've been building this up, so I feel very, very comfortable that we've been reaching everybody. This is not just a question about African American voters.
This election is about everybody in the state. So while we are reaching out to the African American community here in Selma and elsewhere, we're reaching out with the same messages to everyone else.
The other high-profile surrogate that Jones phoned in, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, is already teasing his attacks on the Republican Roy Moore on Twitter by responding to a reporter who posted something Moore said about not wanting transgenders in the military with this. Booker writes, "Well, I'm in the United States Senate, and I don't want to be next to you wondering if Senate pages will be safe from your advances. Your bigotry, ignorance, and hate has no place in the Senate. I'm going to my ancestral home, state of Alabama, to lend a hand in defeating you." Now, a huge problem for Jones in this race that he now trails by about 3.5 points in the Real Clear Politics average of polls has been his stance on abortion. The Democrat is pro-choice, but most people in this state are pro-life. That is a big part of the reason that some Republicans who abandon Roy Moore say that they cannot support Jones, but the Democrat is trying to at least make sure that people don't think he is for certain kinds of abortion with a video on his Twitter page today.
And the abortion attacks? Not true. Doug Jones does not support late-term abortions and never has.
Jones is also pitching himself today in the final days of the campaign as a vote for CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program. He says that that is especially important on days like today when it snows in Alabama. Arthel?
Snowing in Alabama. How about that? You never know what could happen. We'll see what happens on Tuesday. I'll take it. Thanks, Peter. Arthel?
All right, Eric, thank you. Well, new developments in the Russia investigation. FBI Director Chris Wray grilled by Republican lawmakers over concerns about his agency's fairness.
Would it be accurate to say that a senior FBI official changed the wording of the director's statement to ensure that Secretary Clinton was not liable under the Espionage Act?
I think it would not be appropriate for me to speculate about what the Inspector General will or will not find.
And according to the New York Times, White House Communications Director Hope Hicks is the latest official questioned by investigators. The FBI reportedly warned Hicks about attempts by Russian operatives to contact her during the transition. Kristen Fisher is live in Washington with more. So, Kristen, let's talk timeline. When did these Russian operatives allegedly try to contact her?
Arthel, during the transition, so between last November and January, according to the New York Times, the FBI officials cited in the report say there's no evidence that Hope Hicks did anything improper. They were just alarmed by really the boldness of these Russian operatives, especially since this reportedly happened after the U.S. intelligence community had publicly accused Moscow of trying to influence the election. Now, investigators with the special counsel's office met with her, the White House communications director, yesterday, the same day that Mueller's team filed more evidence against Paul Manafort. We're talking line-by-line changes in a Microsoft Word document, which prosecutors claim is proof that Manafort had ghostwritten an op-ed with a colleague who prosecutors claim has ties to Russian intelligence. But Manafort's attorneys say he simply proofread the op-ed and that he did not violate the judge's gag order. Both Manafort and Rick Gates are now going to be back in court first thing Monday morning, Arthel.
And Kristen, at the same time, the special counsel's office is being accused by some Republicans of being unfair, too political. Tell us more about that.
Well, the most recent person that they're pointing to is one of Mueller's top deputies, a man by the name of Andrew Weissman, who, according to the Wall Street Journal, was at Hillary Clinton's election night party in New York City. And this comes right after another investigator in the special counsel's office, Peter Strzok, was removed from the Russia probe for allegedly sending anti-Trump text messages. Here's Republican Congressman Jim Jordan.
He gets kicked off for a text message that's anti-Trump. If you kicked everybody off Mueller's team who was anti-Trump, I don't think there'd be anybody left. So here there's got to be something more here.
But Democrats clearly disagree. Here's Congressman Nadler at that same hearing last week.
I predict that these attacks on the FBI will grow louder and more brazen as the special counsel does his work and the walls close in around the president and evidence of his obstruction and other misdeeds becomes more apparent.
I argue that these attacks are simply a sign that the special counsel's office is doing what it's supposed to do and doing its job, Arthel.
Okay, Kristen Fisher, thank you very much. Eric?
Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, fallout continues tonight over the allegations of sexual harassment against sitting members of Congress. Even more accusations are expected to be revealed in the coming weeks and shake that building even more. Well, tonight, congressional leaders are facing mounting pressure to take action on all this. Here's what House Speaker Paul Ryan had to say about all that taxpayer money that's been shelled out to settle several hundred cases.
The Committee on House Administration is presently holding a wide-ranging hearing on our reporting and settlement process for sexual harassment. The goal of this hearing is to take a look at the entire system. We want to identify what reforms are needed to change the way things work. In addition to just better policies to protect women, we also need a real culture change. We need to recognize that this is a pervasive problem that women face not just here in Congress, but through every industry.
What do they plan? Well, Caroline Shively has more on that from Washington.
Sexual harassment scandals forced Congressman John Conyers and Trent Franks, plus Senator Al Franken, to quit this week. The pressure on Conyers and Franken had been building for weeks, but Franks was a surprise to most of Washington. He reportedly offered a female staffer $5 million if she would conceive a child with him, as he and his wife were struggling with infertility. The congressman denies intimidating or trying to have sex with anyone in his office, but quit effective yesterday after his wife was hospitalized. On Thursday, Frank said, quote, "In the midst of this current cultural and media climate, I am deeply convinced I would be unable to complete a fair House ethics investigation. We're also learning more about how your tax dollars secretly got paid out to workers allegedly harassed by members of Congress." Thursday night, the House Ethics Committee reported that it had stepped up its investigation of Congressman Blake Farenthold, who is accused of sexually harassing a former staffer, then retaliating against her when she complained. Farenthold denies the allegations, but still settled the case for $84,000 out of that secret slush fund. Last night, Congressman Alcee Hastings said he knew nothing about a $220,000 payout in taxpayer money to settle a sexual harassment lawsuit against him. Roll Call broke that story, saying a federal employee accused Hastings of making unwanted sexual advances, then threatening her job. Reaction to all these cases has been swift.
There is no place for sexual harassment in our society, especially in Congress. Period.
This is not about politics. It's the last thing it's about. In fact, this isn't about politics. This is about America, and that's about our country as well.
It's also bipartisan. The accused come from both sides of the aisle. Eric?
All right, Caroline, thanks so much. Marthel?
Eric, an appeals court decides the fate of a man who was convicted of murder after a controversial confession. What the judges ruled, that's coming up, plus the fallout from sexual misconduct on Capitol Hill continues this week. Democratic Senator Al Franken announced he'll be resigning.
I think he did what he had to do, and I wish him well.
Making a murder will remain behind bars. The 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals making the decision in Chicago. The court narrowly overturning a ruling from last year that could have freed him. Dassey says investigators tricked him into confessing his role in the raping and killing of Teresa Halbach in 2005. Dassey and his uncle Stephen Avery are currently serving life in prison.
Well, a series of resignations on Capitol Hill over the allegations of sexual misconduct. Well, it's the buzz on Capitol Hill, and some are thinking there are more names could also fall in the coming weeks. Just this week, we saw Minnesota Senator Al Franken, Michigan Congressman John Conyers, Arizona Congressman Trent Franks, all on the way out. Franken, though, not going quietly as he threw a parting shot at President Trump when he gave his speech on the Senate floor.
Some of the allegations against me are simply not true. Others I remember very differently. I am leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party.
So, what does all this mean when it comes to the political world? David Hawkins knows it well. He's senior editor of Roll Call. David, I think we could agree there's been a huge cultural shift. That's been swift. It's been long in coming in Hollywood and business and on Capitol Hill. But in Washington, it's becoming a political issue. How do you see this going?
Well, sure. Everything is a political issue, and I think I see this as being one of the great, one of the big campaign issues, probably of 2018. If you imagine for a moment that after this budget shutdown that we've been talking about, and after the tax bill is done, you go into the campaign season. President Trump and the Republican Congress don't really have great big legislative plans for next year. The legislative year will be short before campaign season really takes over, and it looks, I think it's a safe prediction to say that how Congress reckons with sexual harassers in its own midst, and how it reckons with its own system for handling this, which is widely criticized at the moment for lacking in transparency and for allowing some members of Congress to use taxpayer money to settle claims against them. How Congress reacts to this, and whether it is perceived as one party handling it well and one party handling it badly, will be one of the big issues of next year.
Yeah, I mean, so far, you got about like 7. There are 7 members of the Congress, there they are, who have been accused. Some have denied it. Others have resigned in various different ways. Do you expect there will be more?
I do expect there to be more. Having said that, I don't know of any more. I think many of us in this town are working on stories, trying to talk to our sources, trying to understand if there are more, and trying to talk to some people about maybe allowing there to be more. Sure, 7. I'd quibble with you about one person on that list, but so 6, 7, that's a little bit more than 1% of the entire membership of Congress. Yes, I think that it is likely that there will be more. Remembering for a minute that Congress skews rich, it skews old, and it skews very male. And it is people, men of a certain generation, of an older generation, that are more likely than not to have gotten away with this culture of harassment for many years. Yes, I think there'll be more.
Yeah, and that's what you said earlier about that Office of Compliance. What, $17 million in taxpayer money to settle, like 268 cases so far? Like, no one ever do anything about that except the members of Congress.
So yes, we should note for a second that those numbers are true over the last 15 years for all claims of all workplace problems in Capitol Hill. To the moment, we only know about 2 of them involving sexual harassment, and there are 2 of the members that you had on your screen a minute ago there. Blake Farenthold, $84,000. He's a Republican from Texas, and just last night we at Roll Call reported $220,000 in taxpayer money to settle harassment claims against Elsie Hastings, a Democrat from Miami.
Yeah, the 7. It's a variety of type of issues, of course, not just sexual allegations. Meanwhile, there's Elsie Hastings, who he had been impeached at one point. He had been a judge, and then he ran for Congress.
He was a federal judge. He was convicted of corruption. That conviction was, in many ways, overturned. He was able to run for Congress. He's been in Congress now for more than 20 years. This involved a woman on the staff of a committee that he ran. It was widely reported that she was complaining against him, but we only learned, Roll Call only reported last night, the amount of the settlement, which is almost approaching triple the other one that we knew about, Blake Farenthold, which is $84,000.
You think Congress is really going to overhaul this?
I do. I think that this is something that the Republicans they have been slow off the mark, the Republican leadership, as you noted. Senator Franken had to resign. John Conyers had to resign. Those 2 sort of got out front, sort of as being sort of the members that were going to be required to be sacrificed. The Republicans were a little slow off the mark with Trent Franks. They still haven't responded truly. They've been all over the map on Roy Moore, and they've been silent on the president. But I think that the Republican leadership is going to realize that they need to drive changes in the system, and I think with the help of some Democrats. I think, there aren't too many real anti-incumbent elections in this country. The last time there was a real anti-incumbent congressional election way back in 1992. after the House bank scandal. That was the last time that more than 10 members of each party were defeated in the same election.
Yeah, going in.
I think that this threatens to happen again unless both parties reform that system.
Yeah, that was the money in the stamps that they were just grabbing the loot, like bank robbers. Finally, I mean, we just made a point about the political aspect with the Republican leadership. Here's what the Wall Street Journal editorial has said just a couple of days ago. The Democrats are eliminating their stains. The Republicans are endorsing theirs. You have to believe in magic to think this is going to end well for Republicans. If Mr. Moore wins, he will haunt the Trump presidency. Chess is a bloodless game, and high-stakes political chess is a brutal game. It's time for the GOP to protect itself if Mr. Trump won't. What does that mean if Mr. Moore wins on Tuesday?
Super powerful editorial. I think it's an excellent point. Trent Franks, he's known in conservative circles as a very vocal conservative. Blake Farenthold, not so well known. Roy Moore is by far and away, if he wins, the most prominent person with a sexual harassment problem in Congress. It's a huge problem for them. Mitch McConnell says that he will open an ethics committee investigation if Mr. Moore wins on Tuesday and comes to Congress. How they handle that
does that mean public hearings?
It could be. I mean, what would they need to do? They would essentially need to reinvestigate these women who have come forward and talked to the Washington Post and try and decide in their own venue whether these women are credible. So yes, it could be public hearings. These women could be called upon to testify publicly. Roy Moore could be called upon to testify publicly. We don't really know how this will shake out. To be honest, the Senate Ethics Committee has been a pretty sleepy place for several years. It would be much busier next year for Moore wins.
Well, remember the controversy with Anita Hill. That could be replayed in the coming year. Wow. David Hawkins, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. Arthel?
And Eric, that Russia election investigation may be getting closer to the president. Investigators reportedly questioning one of Trump's top advisors, the White House communications director. So how serious is this, and what happens next?
To President Trump's decision to proclaim Jerusalem as Israel's capital continuing. The Arab League now calling on the international community to recognize the state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. This, of course, comes as protests have continued this weekend following the president's controversial decision to recognize the holy city. Anger among the Palestinians and their Arab neighbors still running high.
Never going to be a two-state solution after this. There's never going to be peace because he just gave away the capital. It's not anyone's land for him to give it away. It's not. If he wants to give something to them, give them America. He shouldn't be giving away land.
David Lee Miller tonight live in Jerusalem with the latest. Hi, David Lee.
Eric, 2 Palestinians were killed today in airstrikes in Gaza. The Israeli military says those attacks were in retaliation for rockets that were fired into Israel. The targets included Hamas weapons-making facilities, a weapons warehouse, as well as a military compound. Meanwhile, anti-Israeli and anti-U.S. demonstrations took place throughout the day in Gaza and across the West Bank. In Bethlehem and other cities, Palestinians threw stones while Israeli forces responded with rubber-coated bullets and tear gas. There were also clashes along the Gaza border. Israeli officials say the military is trying to exercise restraint. A Hamas spokesman responded by saying, and I quote, "The fuse of the intifada or uprising has been lit." In Jerusalem, outside the Old City, 6 people were arrested for holding what authorities called an illegal protest. Overall, though, it does appear that the clashes today were less intense than what we saw during the last 3 days, but about 140 Palestinians were wounded. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is lashing out at critics of President Trump's Jerusalem declaration. The Prime Minister is accusing some world leaders of having a double standard. He's asking the question, why are they very quick to condemn President Trump for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, yet they remain silent when it comes to the rocket attacks being launched by Hamas and other extremist groups from Gaza? The Israeli Prime Minister, Eric, is now on his way to Paris and Brussels to meet with a number of world leaders. Back to you.
Where you will get reaction there. David Lee, thank you. Arthel?
The Russia investigation taking a new turn and getting closer to the president's inner circle. According to the New York Times, Robert Mueller's investigators questioned the White House communications director, Hope Hicks. The report saying that Hicks received emails from Russian operatives during the presidential transition. These new revelations come just days after FBI Director Christopher Wray defended his agency to House Republicans.
There is no finer institution than the FBI, and no finer people than the men and women who work there and are its very beating heart. Almost 37,000 men and women with a fierce commitment to protecting the American people and upholding the rule of law. Men and women who face the darkest that life has to offer with unyielding integrity and honesty and dedication.
I'm joined now by former federal prosecutor Stephen Mulroy, who is now a University of Memphis law professor and a criminal defense attorney. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Should the American people be concerned that political bias has infected the FBI?
I don't think so, Arcel. I understand that one particular agent, Mr. Strzok, had some texts that were pro-Hillary Clinton and anti-Trump, and he was quickly suspended from the investigation, and there's an ongoing Department of Justice Inspector General investigation into that. But by and large, though, I think the FBI's reputation as a professional, apolitical organization is well-deserved and should continue. The FBI director, of course, has a 10-year term. He's supposed to be independent. The current and prior FBI director are, in fact, Republicans. I think that this one particular incident probably shouldn't be enough to tarnish the image of the agency as a whole.
So as you just pointed out, Peter Strzok was taken off the team, the Mueller investigative team, and he was reassigned to the Human Resources Department. So is there any valid reason to question the integrity of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
I think in questioning the integrity of the entire organization as a whole is an overreaction. I mean, based on what I know about the FBI and, my time as a federal prosecutor, the FBI has always been an apolitical organization. In fact, many of the people in the FBI probably, in their personal views, may lean conservative. But I think the idea is that FBI agents, like all other human beings, may have their private political beliefs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't conduct their investigations in a professional and unbiased manner. Now, those particular texts from that one person, Mr. Peter Strzok, were unfortunate, but as I noted, Mr. Mueller's response was to suspend him from the investigation, and now the Inspector General is investigating all of that. I think that's probably enough.
I want to show a tweet from President Trump that he tweeted last night. Pop that on the screen for me. It says, "So General Flynn lies to the FBI and his life is destroyed, while crooked Hillary Clinton on that now famous FBI holiday interrogation with no swearing in and no recording lies many times and nothing happens to her." This is, of course, referring to Michael Flynn's guilty plea last week, and the president adding, rigged system or just a double standard. So I want to ask you, Professor, Mr. Mulroy, what's your assessment of this distrust and tension between the Trump White House and the FBI being aired out so publicly and through such outlets like Twitter?
Right. Well, Mr. Trump's frustration with the ongoing investigation is understandable, and I can understand why he may, feel that way. But I think the FBI would say that there is a legitimate distinction between what happened with Mr. Flynn, who was pretty much caught dead to rights making affirmative misrepresentations under oath about his contacts with Russian officials, and the Clinton investigation, where at least the FBI came to the conclusion that there was no intent, and there was an intent to disseminate classified information that was required under the relevant statute at issue. I understand why he may be frustrated at the difference in outcome, but to your question, Arcel, I guess it is extraordinary for a president to be making such public statements undermining confidence in the integrity of the FBI. It's not something that we've seen, at least recently, in my memory, and it is an extraordinary development.
I want to circle back to White House Communications Director Hope Hicks. Anything to glean from Ms. Hicks being questioned by special counsel Mueller's team or the subject matter at hand?
Well, I would say this, Arcel, that the mere fact that Hope Hicks was contacted by some Russian operatives during the transition period is not in and of itself an illegal act. It doesn't necessarily mean that Hope Hicks herself did anything illegal. I think the broader significance is just that, as I think you indicated earlier in your introduction to this piece, that it brings the investigation closer in to the inner circle of the White House. It brings the investigation one person closer to the president himself, and I think that just builds on the general narrative. Maybe there were a lot of contacts between Russian operatives and the Clinton campaign, the Trump campaign and the Trump White House.
Well, the investigations continue, so no conclusions as of yet, but we will continue to watch. Stephen Mulroy, thank you very much for your time and analysis this evening.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Well, it's a major milestone in the war against the radical Islamic terrorists of ISIS. Now, the Iraqi government has now claimed victory over the terrorist group. But is this really the end for those terrorists? And a police dog mauls and...
They stop being a country. They go underground and they morph. And these extremists showed us again and again that they're very capable of morphing and taking new manners of battle. Al-Qaeda, which was the mother of ISIS, is still fighting, and ISIS will go underground. They will use suicide bombers, and they will also have a massive presence on the internet that Sunni Arabs and the international coalition of about 60 countries need to fight them ideologically as well as in the battlefield.
And are we doing a good job at that? I mean, the internet.
No, we do not. We do not do a good job. And if you give me an hour, I can tell you why not. For example, I'll give you one example. When the State Department prepares materials against these radicals, they stamp it with the good housekeeping stamp saying this is brought to you by the State Department and the good people of the United States of America. That undermines 90% of the credibility of these materials, because immediately these guys say, oh, this is the American government propaganda.
Oh, but shouldn't they say, hey, look, that's the other side of the story, and, you know, you're going to end up in a ditch if you follow ISIS?
But you're much better off finding credible Arab and Sunni Muslim voices without putting the stamp of the State Department.